Hey guys, how are you today? Is everyone fine? Um, okay. Hi Jenny, Arthur, how are you? Okay guys, I think we can start, right? So let's get started. Today the class is gonna be about dunk bat on the turn. This is a very interesting class. I think that this is something that we are like most people are playing absolutely wrong the way they're playing poker, especially in those kinds of spots where people don't understand enough about the fundamentals of the game, and they end up doing a lot of wrong things that have nothing to do with the actual game. And we're going to talk today about that. Okay, so what we're going to take a look at is going to be how, like, first of all, how often we should be donking on the turn, when we should be donking on the turn, when we're trying to play balanced, and also how we should be playing when we're trying to play exploitive plays, right? And you guys gonna see how interesting it is because this is a simple and basic concept, but we kind of never really think too much about. Okay, so today we're gonna talk about donk bet on the turn from bottom against big blind. Okay, so big blind donking on the turn after getting c betted on the flop. Uh, the if if you look at game theory, if you look the not game theory, but if you look at the solvers, how often they don't bet on the turn. Usually, if you're playing optimal, or if you're playing a very good balanced strategy, you and your opponent, uh, theory will like the solvers will don't bet something around 4% on the turn. So 4% of the turns the big blind is gonna dunk back, but the interesting thing about this is that we know that bottom in general dunk bets c bets way more often than they should. The frequency, the c betting frequency from the pool in general is about 10% higher than the frequency that um, they should be c betting, should be balanced, right? And the frequency that we are calling on the big blind after getting c betted is also lower, right? We're not calling as often as we should. Most of the time we're overfolding, and even the best players, like very good players, have a very hard time calling the frequency that they should be calling on the flop, especially against smaller sizes, right? Because ranges get very abstract. They don't get it's not as simple to defend because sometimes you gotta like let's think about a board like ace 10 4. You need to be calling with king 6 or something. It's not something that is very natural for people, and it's very hard to actually be calling those types of hands. And we overfold a lot on the flop, so that's just natural. It's very hard to even balance that. So taking that into consideration, taking the fact that we are calling less than what we should, and the fact that the bottom is c betting more than what they should, what happens is that our range gets stronger and their range gets weaker, right? Because they're betting more bluffs, more air, and we are calling with less air or less weak hands and having a stronger range on the turn. Now, if you think about theory, if you think about how theory works, theory doesn't really care about, like who was the aggressor on the flop or pre-flop. The thing is that usually what happens is that ranges change, right? And they end up in a way that it makes more sense for the aggressor to keep betting, and it doesn't make too much sense for the person who's defending to bet, right? Usually that's how what happens. But in those cases where we like the bottom is c betting most of their range, and the big blind is defending only a part of like a small part of their range. This changes, right? Because now equity from the big blind is higher, is better. And usually when the equity is higher and better, you usually have more reasons to bet, right? And if you look at the range, how strong the range is, especially on turns that don't help the bottom. So if you open on the bottom, the big blind calls, and it turns something like a 9, a 10, or 8, depending on the texture. But in general, those types of turns that don't, that the big blinds defend more combos with those types of turns than the big blind, and then the bottom opens with those types of turns. Then we are going to have a lot of donk bet on the turn. Now we're going to take a look at that and see how that actually happens. But yeah, it's pretty interesting thing to think about. Now, first of all, this is the average fold from the pool, from the most players against the donk bet on the turn. So people fold about 47% of the time against larger size, like 45 to 65, and they fold about 43 against smaller size, like 29 up to 45%. And right here on the right of this graph, it's how often the theory folds, right? The solvers fold. Not theory. When I say theory, I mean solvers, right? So, solvers fold 39% of the time against like 47 from the pool, and 27% of the time against 43 from the pool, right? So we can see right there that we have a lot of overfold on the flop, okay? Which is on the turn against the donk bet, which is pretty good, right? It's kind of a good reason to think about donk betting, even if the case, the ranges were not the ones that we just talked about, that the big blind have a stronger range. Even if it wasn't the case, people are folding more often than they should anyways, right? But now we're going to look at theory and locked ranges, like the GTO, the balance ranges, and locked ranges. And we're going to compare those two, okay? So first board that I want to bring up is the Queen 8-4 Rainbow, okay? And the bottom C bets a third pot, which usually people do with close to range, like 90+% of their range. They don't really check behind or do anything like different from that too often. And so this is how theory plays on the turn, right? And those are all the turns, right, that the theory plays. And you can see that the solvers only don't bet on the turn 8 and 4, basically. It has some low frequency in 5 and 6. So, and 7 is like almost, you can even see it, but it's there. So it does what we expect it to do, which is basically turns that help your big blind range and don't help the bottom range as much. Because if you think about how many 8x we open from the bottom, it's not that many. We open like maybe like 8-5 suited, maybe 8-4 suited if you're very loose, and like 8-9, 9-8. I mean, from the offsuits, right? And or 8-7, something like that, but not like 8-4 off or anything, right? Like that. So we open like way less 8x, and we defend on a big blind a lot of 8x. We don't it's not like we're calling with 8-4 on the big blind or 8 deuce or 8-3, but we're definitely calling with 8-5 off, 8-6 off, 8-7 off, and all those types of hands that we are not opening as much on the bottom. So definitely something that helps our range, and especially the 4, right? The 4 is even more often, right? So we call with a 5-4 off, we call with 6-4 off, 7-4 off sometimes, and the bottom doesn't open those hands, right, either. So the turn 8 and the turn 4 do help more the big blind range, and they give the big blind range also like more nuts. So it makes sense for you to donk bet part of your range on those turns, right? Now, that's how when we're playing perfectly on the flop, and the turn, and the opponent's playing perfect on the flop and the turn, right? Now, if you look at the locked range, so if we lock the c-betting range and the calling range, we're gonna see that yeah, the bottom bets more than they should. We call less than what we should, and that's the donk bet frequency, right? So we have basically from deuces to queens, we are donk betting a lot, and the the flop, the turns that help us more often than the bottom, those are the ones that we bet basically like 75%, right? So it makes sense, it's something that we expect because it's not like we have a lot of, and you can see that the ace and the king, we don't have, like, we have very little donk bets because those are the turns that actually help the bottom way more than us, right? Because the bottom opens every ace x, most king x, and they have like better king x and ace x because they open ace king, ace queen, that we three bet. Sometimes ace jack that we three bet, and they have like aces kings, which we don't have. And it's also like a larger portion of their range, right? Because they're opening less hands than what we're calling. So ace x is more present in their range than it's in ours. So it makes sense for the king, ace, and king be some be turns that we don't have that much incentive to donk bet, but definitely like queens or queen are lower. Are turns that actually help the big blind more in terms of having more equity. And of course, the better the turn, the more donk bets we'll have. Okay. Now, okay, so if you go to the board, Jack 6-5 two tone, so flush draw Jack 6-5. And after it's a third C bet on the flop, that's how theory usually plays. It donk bets on mostly on turns like 7, 6, 5, 8. For the turns that we think that it should be donk betting more often. And if you look, you can see that the main difference here is that the spread is all over the place, right? It spreads with donk bets on the like turn jack, queen, deuce, all over the place, So it's gonna be, because we have a stronger range, it makes more sense to don't bet on those turns as well, right? Just for the same reasons why we just talked before, So it makes sense. And this is ace jack 10 after a half pot flop on the flop. And this is an interesting spot because if you look at theory or solvers, they usually have a very decent check raising range. They have ace x on their range, check raising range, and that's something that we don't do as much. We almost don't have like raises on ace jack 10 rainbow. So most people don't really raise on those flops. They usually call or fold, and if they raise with unbalanced ranges, like too strong, like they're raising only with like two pair, top pair, and good shot or something like that. They're not raising balanced ranges differently from theory, right? Theory bets very well balanced ranges, and so yeah, and so that's to see that this is a spot that we never don't bet, right? We only don't bet on the jack and the 10, which, like before I said, it's what we expect, right? But when we lock the ranges and we look at how strong our range is, then we have a lot of donk bets on the turn. And if you look at the ace, it's a turn that we have a lot of donk bets. And the reason for that is because we don't raise as much as we should with the ace on the flop. So it ends up that our calling range have a lot of ace x, and it gets much stronger on the turn, right? So we can definitely donk bet a lot on the turn with the ace x when the ace comes, right? So it ends up being like a pretty strong turn to donk bet the ace when we don't raise enough on the flop. Hi, Victor. How are you? Okay, so that's the 10-9-8 rainbow half pot on the flop, and same thing. We have like mostly checks on the turn, and if you look, we have the only turns that it actually donk bets. The solver donk bets on the 10 and the jack, but the thing here is that the reason why it probably does not don't bet on the 9 or the 8 and even the 7 is because this is a board that is very mixed in terms of equity. You know, the bottom hits very well. Basically, every apart from like 10 deuce, 10 3, and 10 4, then basically every other hand that we're gonna have under our bottom range opening. So it's, you know, and you have a lot of Jack X as well. You have a lot of 7X, Queen X. You have a lot of equity as the bottom. So it makes sense for the theory to not don't bet on turns that usually it would don't bet like 9 and 10, right? So yeah, so yeah, in the end, like the theory does not don't bet as much on the turn on any turn, but the Jack and 10. Now, when you lock the ranges, then it don't bets a lot, right? It don't bets a lot of small ranges, small size, with the small size and not very frequently, but in every type of turn, right? And yeah, so that's the last one. I think the 753 rainbow after large size on the flop, and this is interesting because this is a large size. I think I forgot to translate that, but this is like a 2/3 of the pot on the flop. And what happens here is that when you bet 2/3 of the pot, most people they bet like a little bit less. It's a little bit less over bluffed. It's still over bluffed, but it's not as much as other sizes. So the whole thing about like equity changing, it won't change as much on the turn compared to like other spots that we saw before, right? And yeah, so if you look on those spots, we fold a lot, and but like because the batting range is a little bit stronger, ends up being it ends up being less decent. You don't bet on most turns, right? Because the bottom range is stronger, and you can see that we have don't bets on the ace, and the main reason for that is because uh, that's part of the range that we will defend the most against larger sizes. Obviously, we're going to defend them a lot with 4x, 5x, 6x, 7x, but you know, apart from that, we are not calling as much with king high, queen high, jack high, and we're calling mainly with ace x and some other types of values, right? Now, yeah. So to sum up, GTO, when we're trying to play a very well balanced strategy against well balanced players, we want to don't bet mostly on second and third card that when they pair, right? So if it's like a Jack 10-4 or a 9-5-6, 6-5, you're gonna want to bet on the turn 6 and turn 5, and obviously the turns that connect as well, that are lower, that connect better with the big blind, right? So that's usually when you want to dunk bet. Against the pull, though, you want to dunk bet mostly against every turn that doesn't help the villain's range. So if it's not a turn ace or turn king, usually you want to don't bet a lot because usually they're unbalanced on the flop for bluffs, and we are unbalanced on the flop for value. We're calling more often with value. So, and yeah, okay. So yeah, so this is the examples of how our range should be. So it should be a linear range. Okay. So if you look here, we should be betting most of the time with smaller, like third pot sizes, and you can see that we bet basically with every queen, or at least most of our queens. We have some balance with like queen 4 that is two pair, and it's kind of slow playing a little bit, and like the lower queens, we have more check calls as well. We have like frequencies at least of check calls. Queen 5, queen 3 off as well. Sometimes we check calls, so we don't have every single queen in our don't bet range, but we have a lot of queens in our range. We also have a lot of d8s. Yeah, we can see here that we have at least some more than half of the time betting with the 8x. And and basically every equity hand, so every 6x, every 7x, like 10-7 as well. You basically bet with every single semi-bluff, and also like hands with equity like King 10, King Jack, Queen, Jack 10, those types of hands that are not valued. They have over or some decent equity, some good shot. So yeah, we have a very unpolarized range, a very linear range, right? Betting. I have like ace deuce, good shot, ace three, good shot, ace five, good shot, ace seven, good shot. I have basically every type of hand here, right? And then in here is so you guys don't get too worried about how to defend. So you might be thinking, okay, but if I do this and they raise, I don't really know how to play after that because they might be aggressive and try to take me out of the pot because donk bet is not something that people are used to, so they might make mistakes like being over aggressive. And it's not really a problem, right? Because if you look at theory, if theory folds every 8x in this spot, and it only calls it the better 8x, and it also, it fits with the queen x, obviously. And this is without locking the range. And I do believe that most of the time, people, when they're raising on the turn against a donk bet, I don't believe this. I actually, know for a fact that, at least from the sample that we have, it's under bluffed. People usually are raising with value or very, very good draws, And if you log those the spot, you can see that we're gonna fold like a lot of our 8x. We're gonna definitely fold every 8x, and we're gonna fold a lot of our queen x. Apart from the ones that have equity, like queen 6, queen 7, or the better queens like queen jack. But like queen deuce, queen 3, we can definitely fold if they raise on the turn. It's not a huge problem or anything like that. This is the board ace jack 10 with turn 4 is basically the same thing. We have a very linear range. You have all like ace x with at least some decent frequency. And we have like the king x that are bluffs, that are good shot bluffs. We have the queen x that are good shot bluffs. We have the better jack x, like the jack 10 is the two pair, and the queen jack some frequency, king jack we bet because we can bet call. Usually combos that can bet call and have a decent equity, combos that are draws that we can bet full with no problem, and obviously the better hands like ace x as well. Now, yeah, so then, when they raise, the theory only calls it like the better, like every ace x and the better king x, jack x, like the jack with equity. So king jack, king 10, like the 10 with equity. It doesn't call with something like jack 9 or jack 8, jack 6, jack 4. I don't really know why it's calling it jack 7, but, we're probably folding anyways. So yeah, so it's, it's pretty interesting how it's not that hard to defend, but if you lock the range should be a stronger range, you can even fold like the ace x and basically call it like the like the two pair and the better pairs. It's like ace queen or obviously the top two pair and top and second pair sets. And theory does call with things like king 4, which is a good shot, and bottom pair. And the reason for that is just you have a weaker range that you can hit on the river, and you can balance better your range. But we don't really need to have this on our range, so it's fine. So yeah, you can definitely defend with a very strong range. You don't really need to be too careful and to be too worried about overfolding or anything. Another spot here is queen 8-4. Oh no, wait a minute. I think that's it. I think I just got 2 times the same. Yeah. So yeah, that's it, guys. I hope you guys liked it. This is, you don't really have to worry too much about in a huge frequency now. 30% of the time, which is probably what theory actually does. You don't really need to worry about that. But the main point here is that if you have something like 5% donk bet on the turn, 6% donk bet on the turn, this is definitely a mistake that you need to fix. It's something that we really should be using our range differently because we have a lot of equity on the turn. So we can definitely donk way more than what we do, and we can get more money with our bluffs that way and get more money with our values as well. Like if they're overfolding, you get more money with your bluffs. If they're overcalling, you get more money with your values. And, it makes more sense to do that and be more, exploring more the fact that people are over betting on the flop. Okay, guys, I hope you liked it. We're gonna have the class next week, same time. I hope everyone's here. Thank you very much. Bye. See you.